Cold. That was the first sensation that returned to Kale as consciousness slowly crept back. Cold, damp stone beneath his bruised body, and the unmistakable scent of mineral-rich earth. His eyes fluttered open to unfamiliar darkness, punctuated only by faint crystalline luminescence from the walls around him. The events of the past days returned in fragments. His research expedition to Xylo's moon, the unexpected encounter with a Felid patrol, the accusations of espionage, and then pain. Kale pushed himself up against the rough wall, wincing as his body protested. His xenobotanist equipment was gone, as were his communication devices and even his reinforced field boots. The cell, for that was unmistakably what it was, measured perhaps 8 feet by 6, with a single entrance sealed by bars of an unfamiliar metallic alloy that gleamed with an iridescent blue sheen in the dim light. Beyond those bars lay a corridor carved directly into crystalline rock, illuminated by geothermal-powered fixtures that emitted a steady amber glow. Occasionally, shadows moved past, tall, lithe figures with fluid movements that no human could replicate. The Felids, native to Xylos, evolutionarily analogous to Earth's felines, but with a complex social structure and technological understanding that rivaled humanity's in many respects, though followed entirely different principles. They had mistaken him for a corporate spy. That much had become clear during his brutal interrogation. The Ceres mining consortium had been encroaching on contested territories, and tensions were high. A lone human xenobotanist collecting rare fungi samples had been an easy target for suspicion. Kale's observations were interrupted by approaching footsteps, lighter than most he'd heard, but still carrying the distinctive cadence of Felid movement. A figure appeared before his cell, taller than an average human, but more slender, covered in short, dense fur and shades of silver gray, with unusual dark markings along the shoulders and spine. Her face, for Kale had learned enough to recognize female Felid traits, bore the characteristic feline structure, but her eyes were what caught his attention. Unlike the amber or green eyes of other guards, hers were a deep violet that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the ambient light. She carried a tray with what passed for prisoner rations, a bowl of some gray, gelatinous substance, and a small container of water. Without a word, she slid the tray through a slot at the bottom of the bars. Kale watched her movements, efficient, economical, but lacking the aggressive posturing the other guards typically displayed. "Thank you," Kale said in the simplified trade language he'd studied before his expedition. The guard's ear twitched slightly, but she offered no response as she turned to leave. "Not worth wasting words on it, Lyra," came a gruff voice from farther down the corridor. Another guard appeared, larger, with mottled brown fur and a scarred muzzle. "The soft skin will be processed soon enough. Command just needs to decide if extraction is worth the effort." The female guard, Lyra, apparently, gave a non-committal grunt. "Waste of resources either way," she replied, her voice lower and smoother than Kale expected. "It's clearly not military or corporate. Wrong physiology, wrong scent markers." The male guard snorted derisively. "Since when are you an expert on human infiltration tactics? Maybe they're evolving their methods." He approached Kale's cell, bearing fangs and what humans might mistake for a smile, but Kale recognized as pure intimidation. "Maybe I should help with the interrogation. I've been practicing my techniques." Kale instinctively backed away, but remained silent. Showing fear would only encourage the predatory instinct. "Koresh wants it intact for now," Lyra said, stepping slightly between her fellow guard and the cell. "The elders are still deliberating. New protocol after what happened at the western outpost." The male guard's ears flattened momentarily, then rose again as he regained composure. "Fine. Your sector, your rules." He cast a final contemptuous glance at Kale before stalking away, his heavy footfalls echoing down the corridor. Lyra remained for a moment, her back to the cell. Then, without turning, she spoke quietly. "The water is clean. The nutrition paste is adequate. Eat." With that cryptic advice, she too departed, leaving Kale alone with his meager meal and multiplying questions. Days passed in a monotonous blur of dim light, damp cold, and insufficient food. Kale marked time by guard rotations and the subtle changes in the ambient temperature that seemed to follow some pattern related to the moon's geothermal activity. He learned to recognize the guards by their footsteps long before they appeared. The heavy, deliberate stride of the scarred one called Soren, the quick, nervous steps of a younger guard with rust-colored fur, and the measured, lighter footfalls of Lyra. She was different from the others, not just in her distinctive coloration. She performed her duties with a detached efficiency that nonetheless lacked the casual cruelty displayed by most. Once, when delivering his rations during a shift, when she believed him to be sleeping, Kale noticed the water portion was slightly larger than usual, and the nutrition paste contained identifiable plant fibers that made it marginally more palatable. Another time, when a maintenance issue caused the temperature in the cell block to drop dangerously, she had discreetly slid a thin thermal blanket through the bars, retrieving it before her shift ended, but long enough for Kale to recover from the worst of the chill. These small mercies puzzled him. They weren't enough to significantly improve his condition, but they represented an anomaly in the otherwise consistent hostility of his captors. Each time he attempted to thank her or initiate any form of communication, she responded with either silence or the briefest of acknowledgments, a flick of an ear, a slight inclination of her head. As his initial terror of immediate execution faded into the grinding reality of indefinite imprisonment, Kale found himself focusing more on understanding the social dynamics of his captors. He noted how other guards deferred to Lyra despite her relatively unimposing physical presence. He observed the subtle signals exchanged between felids, ear positions, tail movements, scent-marking behaviors against doorways. There was hierarchy here, complex and nuanced in ways human military structures weren't. Lyra, despite commanding respect, seemed to operate somewhat apart from the others. There were no casual interactions, no equivalent of break-room chatter between her and fellow guards. They treated her with a wary deference that suggested respect born not of affection, but of something else, perhaps ability, perhaps fear. On what Kale estimated to be his 17th day of captivity, an incident occurred that deepened his curiosity. A loud hissing noise suddenly erupted from somewhere down the corridor, followed by shouts and the sound of rushing liquid. Guards ran past his cell, including Soren, who was barking orders that Kale couldn't fully comprehend. Minutes later, Lyra appeared, moving with purpose toward the commotion. She passed his cell without a glance, but Kale could see that she carried some kind of tool, a metallic device with extending components that resembled both a wrench and a calibration instrument. The shouting intensified, punctuated by a loud metallic bang and the sound of escaping gas. Kale pressed himself against the bars, straining to see what was happening. From his limited vantage point, he could make out a panel in the wall had been removed, revealing a complex network of pipes glowing with heat. Vapor was escaping from a rupture, filling the corridor with mineral-scented mist. Soren was shouting at a technician who seemed paralyzed with indecision. Then Lyra stepped forward, calmly requesting space with a single authoritative word. The others fell back as she approached the damaged section. With precise, measured movements, she manipulated several valves, rerouting the flow. Then, using the tool she brought, she made a series of quick adjustments to the rupture component. The hissing subsided, replaced by the normal ambient hum of the facility systems. There was a moment of silence, then grudging acknowledgments from the other guards. Soren said something too low for Kale to catch, to which Lyra responded with a simple nod before turning away. As she passed Kale's cell on her return, their eyes met briefly. There was no triumph in her expression, no seeking of approval or recognition, only the same watchful assessment he'd grown accustomed to. But in that moment, Kale realized that Lyra was far more than just a prison guard. She understood the systems that kept this mountain stronghold functioning. She commanded respect through competence rather than intimidation. And most intriguingly, she had taken small but deliberate risks to alleviate his suffering. Who was she? And more importantly, could she be the key to his survival? Weeks passed. Kale's body adapted somewhat to the meager rations and harsh conditions. but his hopes of rescue or release dwindled with each passing day. His expedition team would have reported his disappearance by now, but diplomatic relations between humans and felids were tenuous at best. Corporate interests on Xylos would complicate any negotiation, and even if the truth of his scientific mission were accepted, the bureaucracy of interspecies diplomacy moved glacially. One evening, or what passed for evening in the timeless environment of the prison, Kale heard the now familiar footsteps of Lyra approaching. She appeared with the usual tray, but instead of simply depositing it and leaving, she paused. "You called me by name yesterday," she said, her voice low. "How did you learn it?" Kale was startled by the direct address after so many days of near silence. "I heard the others use it," he replied cautiously. "I didn't mean any offense." Lyra's whiskers twitched slightly, the equivalent of a raised eyebrow. "Yet you use it instead of guard or captor." "Why?" Kale considered his response carefully. "Names matter. They're identity, not function." She studied him for a long moment, her violet eyes unreadable. "Why do you not rage against your imprisonment? The others before you did. They cursed, they threatened, they tried to bargain. Would it change anything?" Kale asked simply. "No." "Then why waste the energy?" He gestured weakly at his surroundings. "I'm a xenobotanist, not a soldier. I study plant analog life forms on non-Earth worlds. I was collecting samples of the luminescent fungi from the northern caverns when your patrol found me." "I know." This surprised him. "You do. Your scent lacks the markers of deception, and your equipment was botanical in nature, not surveillance." "Then why am I still here?" Lyra's ears flattened slightly. "Politics, bureaucracy, the usual impediments to rational action." She glanced down the corridor, then back at him. "Why do you not show the same contempt for me as for the others? I am equally your jailer." The question caught Kale off guard. "I observe. It's what scientists do." "You're different." "Different," she repeated, testing the word. "Because I don't take pleasure in cruelty. Because you take risks you don't need to. The extra water. The thermal blanket during the cold spell. Warning me which guards to avoid eye contact with." He held her gaze. "Why?" For the first time, Lyra seemed discomfited. "Balance," she said finally. "There is too much imbalance already." She slid the tray through the slot, but this time Kale noticed something else partially concealed beneath the nutrition paste container, a small, polished stone that gleamed with internal light, like a piece of the crystalline walls had been shaped and refined. "Keep this hidden," she said so quietly he barely heard her. "It marks you as recognized. The lower ranks will sense it and may leave you alone." Before he could question her further, she was gone, moving silently down the corridor as if their conversation had never happened. Kale examined the stone once he was certain no other guards were nearby. It was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly with a bluish light that matched the mineral veins in the walls. Some kind of geothermal energy conductor, perhaps, or maybe something with cultural significance he couldn't fathom. Whatever it was, Lyra had taken a significant risk in giving it to him. The stone proved effective. The next day, when the young rust-furred guard delivered his meal, there was a noticeable shift in behavior. The guard sniffed the air near the cell with a confused expression, then backed away with slightly lowered eyes, a submissive gesture Kale had never seen directed toward prisoner. However, not all reactions were positive. Later that day, Soren passed by the cell and stopped abruptly, nostrils flaring. His eyes narrowed as he surveyed Kale with new suspicion. "You smell of crystal heart," he growled. "Ow!" Kale remained silent, praying the stone was well hidden in a crack in the wall where he'd placed it. Soren approached the bars, fangs partially bared. "Someone has marked you." "Who?" When Kale offered no response, Soren's expression darkened. "It makes no difference. The council votes tomorrow on your extraction. Koresh's faction wants your knowledge of the northern territories. My faction wants an example made for the other human interlopers." His lips pulled back in a predatory smile. "Guess which option leaves fewer pieces of you intact?" As he stalked away, Kale felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. Whatever protection the stone offered, it clearly had limits. And now, it seemed, time was running out. That night, Kale was startled awake by the soft sound of the cell door mechanism activating. He scrambled backward instinctively, expecting Soren or his allies coming to begin the extraction early. Instead, Lyra slipped inside, closing the door behind her. She moved to where he cowered against the wall and crouched to his level, her expression tense. Soren's suspects. He's pushing for immediate action, bypassing the council. Her voice was barely audible. The resource minister arrived today with news of increased human activity near the northern fungal forests, exactly where you were found. I had nothing to do with that, Kale protested. My expedition was purely scientific. I believe you, she interrupted. But it doesn't matter what I believe. Soren's faction will use the coincidence to justify immediate extraction, followed by disposal. Kale felt his blood run cold. Disposal? Lyra didn't elaborate, but her meaning was clear. There is a way, she said after a moment. One option that would place you under protection that even Soren cannot challenge without risking his position. What option? Kale asked, desperate for any alternative to extraction. Lyra's posture shifted subtly, an almost imperceptible tension entering her shoulders. Bonding, she said, the word hanging heavy between them. Bonding? I don't understand. It is a deep connection, a spiritual and social commitment recognized by our oldest laws. Bonded pairs are considered a single unit in many respects, protected by each other's status, sharing resources and responsibilities. She hesitated. It is seldom done with outsiders, almost never with non-Felids. Kale struggled to process what she was suggesting. You're asking me to, what, marry you? A ripple of what might have been amusement crossed her features. That is a simplistic comparison, but not entirely inaccurate. The bond is typically permanent, though there are provisions for trial periods in unusual circumstances. Her eyes held his, which this certainly qualifies as. Why would you do this? Risk your position, your standing? Lyra looked away, her tail twitching in what Kale had come to recognize as discomfort. My reasons are my own. That's not good enough, Kale insisted, finding courage in desperation. If I'm going to enter some kind of alien spiritual marriage as my only alternative to torture and death, I need to know why my potential spouse is willing to become a pariah. Her eyes flashed with a sudden intensity. Because I know what it is to be judged for what you are rather than who you are, she said fiercely. Because I've seen too many innocents sacrificed to politics and fear. Because the balance must be maintained. She took a deep breath, visibly composing herself. And because your knowledge of the fungi could be vital if what I suspect about the human activity is correct. And what do you suspect? That they're not there for mining, as Soren claims. The fungal forests have unique properties. They purify and transmute certain compounds in ways our scientists have never fully understood. If humans have discovered this. She shook her head. But that is a concern for after we secure your safety. Will you accept the bond? It would begin as a trial until the current crisis passes. Kale weighed his options, which were effectively non-existent. Death and torture on one hand, an alien spiritual union with a guard he barely knew on the other. Yet, Lyra had shown him kindness when there was no benefit to doing so. She had taken risks for him already. Yes, he said finally. I accept. Relief flickered across Lyra's features, quickly replaced by determination. The announcement will cause disruption. Be prepared. She was right. The next morning, when Lyra formally declared her intention to bond with the human prisoner before the gathered guards, the reaction was immediate and volatile. Soren's roar of outrage echoed through the crystalline passages, and several other guards displayed visible shock or disgust. This is an abomination, Soren snarled, advancing on Lyra with bristling fur. You dishonor your lineage, your position, everything our ancestors built. Lyra stood her ground, neither advancing nor retreating. I invoke the right of selective bonding under the Mountain Code, Section 3. Any warrior of proven worth may choose their bondmate without interference, provided the chosen one accepts freely and passes the trial of worthiness. An older female Felid with silver-streaked fur stepped forward. Her insignia marked her as a senior officer. The code makes no provision for non-Felid bonding, she stated, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. Nor does it forbid it, Lyra countered. The ancient texts speak of spirit compatibility as the true measure of worthiness, not form or origin. Murmurs spread through the assembled guards. Kale, watching from behind the bars, realized that Lyra was navigating a legal or traditional loophole, one that clearly made many uncomfortable but that none could immediately dismiss. The older Felid. Kale guessed she must be Koresh, the leader Soren had mentioned, studied Lyra with calculating eyes. You realize what you're risking? Your status, your future advancements, potentially your place in the stronghold itself. I do. And you believe this. Human, worthy of such sacrifice. Lyra's gaze didn't waver. I believe in the trial. If he is worthy, the echoes will reveal it. If not, then judgment is made. Koresh considered this for a long moment, then inclined her head slightly. The trial of echoes will proceed at moonrise. Prepare your chosen. She fixed Kale with an evaluating stare. If he fails, both your fates are sealed. As the gathering dispersed, Soren lingered, his hostility palpable. This changes nothing, he growled at Lyra. Trial or no trial. The human is a threat, and you are now compromised. Watch your back, outcast. The way he spat the last word made it clear it was a specific insult, not a general term. Lyra's ears flattened momentarily, but she made no response as Soren stalked away. When they were alone, Kale asked, "Was the trial of echoes?" Lyra's expression was grim, a psychic and physical ordeal. The deep caves beneath the stronghold contain crystals that amplify and reflect emotional and mental energies. You will experience echoes of our collective past, our pain, our triumphs. The mountain itself will test your spirit's compatibility with ours. She looked troubled. It is difficult even for Felid initiates. For a human. But you think I can pass? I think you have qualities that may resonate unexpectedly with the echoes. Your scientist's mind, your empathy for life forms others would consider insignificant, your resilience. She met his eyes directly. And I think you have no choice but to try. Moonrise came more quickly than Kale would have liked. He was escorted from his cell by Lyra and two neutral guards, down through winding passages that delved deeper into the mountain's heart. The air grew warmer, charged with a strange energy that made the fine hairs on his arms stand up. They emerged into a vast chamber where crystalline formations rose from floor to ceiling like frozen waterfalls, glowing with internal light in shades of blue and violet. In the center was a clear area surrounded by smaller crystals arranged in a circle. Several Felids already waited there, including Koresh and, unfortunately, Soren. The human will enter the circle alone, Koresh announced. Lyra, as sponsor, will remain at the threshold to serve as anchor and witness. Lyra guided Kale to the edge of the crystal circle. Remember, she whispered, the echoes test intention and essence, not strength. Do not resist them. That leads to psychic damage. But do not surrender completely either. Maintain your core self while allowing the experiences to flow through you. With those cryptic instructions, she gently pushed him into the circle. Immediately, the crystals brightened, their light pulsing in a rhythm that seemed to match his heartbeat. Kale stood uncertainly in the center, not sure what to expect. The first sensation was a wave of disorientation as the chamber around him seemed to dissolve, replaced by swirling colors and fragmentary images. Then came sounds, distant at first, then closer, surrounding him. Voices speaking in the Felid language, snippets of conversation, cries of pain and triumph. The sensations intensified. Suddenly, Kale wasn't just hearing and seeing these fragments. He was experiencing them. The fierce pride of a young warrior making their first kill. The anguish of a mother losing her cubs to illness. The exhilaration of racing along crystalline ridges under twin moons. The bitter taste of exile. The warm security of the pack. Each experience crashed over him like a wave, threatening to drown his sense of self. He struggled to follow Lyra's advice, neither fighting against the sensations nor allowing them to consume him completely. It was like trying to stand firm in a rushing river, letting the water flow around rather than through him. Some visions were deeply disturbing. Centuries of territorial wars, the suffering under some unknown catastrophe that drove the Felids into the mountains, the sacrifices made to survive. Others were beautiful. The discovery of the crystal's resonant powers, the establishment of the first strongholds, the development of a society that blended primal strength with sophisticated understanding of energy and matter. Throughout it all, Cale clung to his core identity, his scientific curiosity, his empathy, his human perspective that allowed him to observe even as he experienced. Rather than trying to become Felid in his responses, he accepted these alien emotions while maintaining his human framework for processing them. Time lost all meaning. It might have been minutes or hours when the visions began to change, becoming more specific. Cale found himself experiencing memories that felt more immediate, more personal. A young Felid female with unusual violet eyes, isolated from her peers due to her coloration, a mutation considered either lucky or cursed, depending on who was judging. Her struggle for acceptance, her determination to prove her worth through competence rather than aggression. Her growing disillusionment with certain aspects of Felid society even as she rose through its ranks. With a shock, Cale realized he was experiencing Lyra's memories. The bond was already forming, creating a channel between their minds through the amplifying power of the crystals. The final wave of visions was the most intense. Impressions of the mountain itself, ancient beyond comprehension, viewing the Felids as temporary inhabitants in its eternal existence. This consciousness was alien even to the Felids, operating on a timescale where decades were moments, with a flow of geothermal energy through crystal. Veins was a heartbeat. It regarded Cale with curious attention. This strange, soft-skinned creature so different from its usual inhabitants. Cale felt himself being evaluated, his essence examined by something vast and incomprehensible. He opened himself to this scrutiny, offering his fascination with life in all its forms, his respect for the interconnectedness of ecosystems, his wonder at the universe's diversity. These were the core principles that had led him to become a xenobotanist, to seek understanding rather than exploitation. Something in this resonated with the ancient consciousness. Not approval, exactly, but a recognition of compatible patterns. The pressure of scrutiny eased, replaced by a sensation of conditional acceptance. The visions began to fade. The chamber gradually reappeared around Cale as he swayed on unsteady legs, drenched in sweat and trembling with exhaustion. The circle of crystals had dimmed to a soft glow, and the assembled Felids were watching him with expressions ranging from astonishment to disappointment. Lyra rushed forward to support him as his knees buckled. "He endures," she announced formally. "The trial is complete." Koresh approached, her expression guarded. The crystals accept him against all expectation. She studied Cale with new interest. There is something in this human's spirit that resonates with the mountain's heart. The trial bond is recognized. Soren made a disgusted sound. A technical passing at best. The human showed no warrior spirit, no proper response to the battle visions. "Not all bonds are warrior bonds," countered an older male Felid whom Cale hadn't noticed before. "The archives speak of healer bonds, scholar bonds, builder bonds. Perhaps this is something new, or something dangerous," Soren muttered, but he didn't press the point further in Koresh's presence. Cale was too exhausted to follow all the nuances of the discussion that followed. He was vaguely aware of being helped from the chamber, of ascending through passages that seemed to spin around him, of finally being deposited not in his cell, but in a small, private room with actual furnishings, a sleeping platform, a water source, a heating element. "Rest," Lyra told him, her voice seeming to come from very far away. "The trial takes much energy, especially from one not born to our ways. We will speak when you recover." Cale wanted to ask a dozen questions, but unconsciousness claimed him before he could form words. He awoke to the sound of quiet movement. Opening his eyes, he found Lyra placing a tray of food, actual food, not the prison nutrition paste, on a small table near his sleeping platform. The room was dimly lit by a crystalline fixture that emitted a pleasant amber glow, revealing simple but functional furnishings carved from the living rock. "How long was I unconscious?" Kale asked, his voice raspy. "Nearly a full day's cycle," Lyra replied, turning to face him. "The trial affects everyone differently. For some, it's primarily physical exhaustion. For others, the mental and emotional impact requires longer recovery." Kale pushed himself up to a sitting position, noting that his prison garments had been replaced with simple but clean clothing of Felid design, loose-fitting and made from material that felt like a cross between linen and silk. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Am I still a prisoner?" Lyra sat on a stone bench opposite him. "Your status has changed. You are now officially my bond initiate, essentially an outsider under my direct protection and responsibility. Not a prisoner, but not free either. Your movements will be restricted, and you will be under observation, but you have certain rights that prisoners do not. And this bond, what exactly does it mean for us? For now, it means we are linked in the eyes of our law and tradition. The trial period typically lasts until the next major lunar alignment, about 40 days from now. During that time, we are expected to determine if the bond is viable for permanent establishment. And if it's not, it can be dissolved with minimal consequence, provided both parties agree and no laws have been violated." She hesitated. "However, my decision to bond with a non-Felid, especially a human, has already created complications. Certain factions see it as a dangerous precedent or a betrayal of our ways." "Soren's faction," Kale guessed. Lyra nodded. "He leads the traditionalists who believe any contact with humans inevitably leads to corruption and loss of our independence. Recent events have strengthened his position." "What events?" "Increased human activity in our territories. Corporate mining operations encroaching on sacred grounds. Unexplained equipment found near crucial resource areas." Her expression darkened. "And rumors of Felids collaborating with humans for personal gain, betraying stronghold secrets." Kale absorbed this information. "And by bonding with me, you've positioned yourself as a potential collaborator in their eyes." "Yes, though Koresh, our sector commander, is pragmatic enough to recognize the potential benefits of having human scientist perspective, especially one who has passed the trial of echoes." Lyra's lips curved in what Kale recognized as the Felid equivalent of a wry smile. "You've become a valuable political chess piece, Kale. Neither side can eliminate you without consequences now." "Lucky me," Kale muttered. Then a thought struck him. "Soren called you outcast. What did he mean?" Lyra's ears flattened momentarily, a sign of discomfort Kale had come to recognize. "My coloration is unusual. Violet eyes and silver-gray fur, with specific marking patterns, are considered signs of an ancient bloodline believed to carry both gifts and curses. Some see it as an omen of change, either good or ill, depending on their perspective." She shrugged, a deliberate human gesture that seemed oddly natural for her. "I was not exactly ostracized, but always set apart. It made integrating challenging. So you know what it's like to be the outsider," Kale said, understanding dawning. "That's part of why you helped me." "Perhaps." Lyra stood abruptly. "You should eat, then rest more. Tomorrow, we begin establishing our routine. As my bond initiate, you'll be expected to accompany me during certain duties, learn our ways, demonstrate your value to the stronghold." "And the fungi I was studying? You mentioned they might be important." A shadow crossed Lyra's face. "Yes, but that discussion requires more security than we currently have. Eat. Recover your strength. We have challenges ahead." Those challenges became apparent all too soon. Word of the unprecedented human-Felid bond spread quickly through the stronghold. As Lyra escorted Kale through the crystalline passages the following day, they were met with reactions ranging from curious stares to outright hostility. Some Felids deliberately changed direction to avoid them. Others made symbolic gestures that Kale couldn't interpret, but that clearly disturbed Lyra. Their first destination was a meeting with Koresh in her private chambers, a spacious cavern whose walls were lined with data terminals, physical texts, and ceremonial weapons. The commander received them with formal correctness that stopped short of warmth. The council remains divided on your bond, she informed them without preamble. The traditionalists argue for nullification on grounds of security. The progressives see potential advantages in your unique perspective, human. I have a name, Kale said quietly. It's Kale. Koresh's whiskers twitched. Yes, Kale, xenobotanist. Your credentials have been verified through intercepted communications. Your story appears legitimate. She fixed him with a penetrating stare, which makes your presence in the northern fungal forests even more intriguing. The bioluminescent fungi were the focus of my research. They exhibit properties unlike any Earth species. Properties our people have utilized for centuries, Koresh interrupted. But recently, certain varieties have shown signs of disruption. Growth patterns altered, luminescence diminished. And coincidentally, human activity in the region has increased. The Ceres Mining Consortium, Kale guessed. They've been exploring new extraction sites throughout this sector. Their official purpose, yes, but our scouts report unusual equipment, not standard mining gear, and their operations concentrate near the largest fungal colonies. Lyra leaned forward. You believe they've discovered the transmutation properties? Koresh nodded grimly. The fungi don't just glow, Kale. They transform certain elements found in our soil into compounds with remarkable properties. Energy condensation, molecular stability. Properly cultivated, these compounds power much of our technology and would be incredibly valuable on the interstellar market, Kale realized. But harvesting them improperly would disrupt the fungal life cycle. Already happening, Koresh confirmed. Which brings us to your potential value. Your scientific understanding of these organisms might help us counter the damage being done, and your human perspective might help us understand what Ceres is planning. It was a clear quid pro quo, protection in exchange for expertise. Kale nodded slowly. I'll help however I can, but I'll need access to my equipment and, ideally, samples from affected colonies. Arrangements will be made. For now, you and Lyra will be assigned quarters in the eastern sector. You'll have limited access to common areas under Lyra's supervision. Koresh's expression hardened. Be aware that not everyone accepts your presence, bond or no bond. Tensions are high and incidents happen. The warning proved prescient. As they were leaving the commander's chambers, they encountered Soren and two of his allies in a narrow passage. The larger Felid deliberately blocked their path, forcing them to stop. The outcast and her pet human, he sneered. How touching that our great traditions have been reduced to this farce. Lyra's posture shifted subtly, a defensive stance that Kale recognized from his brief xenobiology training. We have duties assigned by Koresh. Step aside. Of course. Soren moved slightly, but not enough to truly clear the path. We wouldn't want to interfere with whatever scheme you've concocted with your human masters. One of Soren's companions, a lean female with russet fur, hissed softly. I still smell the prison on him. Bond or not, prey is prey. Kale remained silent, understanding that in this confrontation, any intervention from him would only escalate tensions. He kept his posture non-threatening, but didn't lower his gaze. Submission would be interpreted as weakness. Your concerns have been noted and filed, Lyra said coldly. Now move aside or explain to Koresh why her orders were delayed. The mention of the commander was enough to create a reluctant opening. As they passed, Soren whispered just loud enough for both to hear. Accidents happen in the lower levels, even to those with protection. Once they were well away from the encounter, Kale released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. I'm guessing that wasn't just a random encounter. Soren is gathering support, Lyra confirmed, her voice tight. The bond has forced him to be cautious, but he won't stop opposing us. Over the following days, Kale adjusted to his new reality. The quarters assigned to them consisted of two adjoining chambers carved from the living rock of the mountain, simply furnished but comfortable by field standards. The main area served as both living and working space, while a smaller chamber offered sleeping platforms and basic hygiene facilities that Kale had to adapt to with Lyra's reluctant instruction. Though no longer imprisoned, Kale's movements remained restricted. He could only access certain areas of the stronghold when accompanied by Lyra, which necessarily meant adapting to her duty schedule. He spent most of his time in their quarters, studying the limited data on the fungal forest that Koresh had authorized for his use, and trying to piece together the larger picture from fragments of information. Initially, their interactions were purely functional. Lyra explaining essential protocols, Kale asking clarifying questions about the data. But gradually, during the quiet hours when her duties were complete, conversations began to extend beyond immediate necessities. "The fungi you were studying," Lyra said one evening as they shared a meal of stewed root vegetables and protein that was mercifully more palatable than prison rations. "What specifically interested you about them?" Kale looked up from his data tablet. "Their communication network, primarily. On Earth, we've discovered that fungi create vast underground networks that allow plants to share nutrients and information. But the xylo species take it to another level. They transmit energy patterns that almost resemble data packets." His eyes lit up with scientific enthusiasm. "And the bioluminescence isn't just a byproduct. It's a form of external communication. Different pulses and colors signaling different conditions. Like our ancestors' fire signals," Lyra observed. "Exactly, but infinitely more complex." Kale hesitated, then asked, "How do your people use them?" Koresh mentioned energy condensation. Lyra considered how much to share. "The crystalline structures throughout our stronghold, they're cultivated using compounds harvested from mature fungal colonies. The fungi transmute raw geothermal energy into stable, usable forms." She gestured at the softly glowing wall fixture. "Light, heat, power for our systems, all derived from fungal extraction combined with crystal amplification." "Sustainable energy," Kale murmured. "That's why Ceres is interested. Not conventional mining, but the secrets of energy transmutation," Lyra finished. "Worth far more than mineral deposits." She frowned. "But their extraction methods are damaging the colonies. They take without understanding the balance required." Kale was struck by the passion in her voice. "You care about the balance. You've mentioned it before." Lyra's ears flickered, embarrassment perhaps. "It's central to our older traditions. Before the military factions gained dominance, all things in nature exist in relationship, in balance. Disruption leads to harm. That's not so different from ecological principles in human science," Kale observed. "Interconnectedness, symbiosis, sustainable cycles. Yet your corporations seem happy to ignore these principles when profit is involved," Lyra said pointedly. "Many humans oppose that approach," Kale countered. "My own work is focused on understanding and preserving, not exploiting." He set aside his tablet. "Is that why you risked your position for me?" "Because I represented a chance to restore balance." Lyra was silent for a long moment. "Partly," she finally admitted, "but also because—" She seemed to struggle with articulating the thought. "Because when I looked at you, I saw someone who observed rather than judged, who sought to understand rather than control." Her violet eyes met his, a rare quality in any species. The moment of connection hung between them, unexpectedly intimate. Kale felt a strange resonance, as if an echo of the trial was repeating in miniature, a recognition of compatible patterns across the divide of entirely different evolutionary paths. Lyra broke the silence first, standing abruptly. "We should rest. Koresh has approved a visit to the research laboratories tomorrow. Your equipment has been analyzed and cleared for your use." The following weeks established a rhythm to their unusual partnership. Mornings were typically spent in the research laboratory, where Kale worked with his recovered equipment to analyze fungal samples from affected colonies. Lyra would perform her security duties nearby, occasionally joining discussions when her knowledge of field applications proved relevant. Afternoons often involved meetings with various specialists, Phylobotanists with their empirical but non-systematic knowledge of the fungi, engineers concerned about energy production, scouts reporting on series activities. Initial hostility gradually gave way to grudging professional respect as Kale's expertise proved genuinely valuable. He discovered that the fungi were indeed being damaged by series extraction methods. Heavy machinery disrupting the delicate mycelial networks. Chemical agents used to stimulate bioluminescence, depleting the colony's resources. But more concerning was evidence that the corporation had begun cultivating isolated samples in artificial environments, attempting to industrialize production of the energy-transmuting compounds. They're missing crucial elements, Kale explained to Koresh and her council during a formal presentation. The fungi don't exist in isolation. They're part of a complex relationship with the crystalline mineral deposits and the geothermal vents. The transmutation process requires all three components in balanced interaction. Can they eventually discover this? An older council member asked. Given time, possibly. But their current approach is like trying to produce honey by isolating single bees in test tubes. It fundamentally misunderstands the system. Kale displayed comparative growth charts. Meanwhile, their extraction is causing accelerating damage to natural colonies. At this rate, some regions will be completely non-viable within months. The implications were clear. The Felids faced not just territorial encroachment, but a threat to their energy infrastructure and way of life. The council sessions grew increasingly tense as different factions argued over appropriate responses. Soren and his allies pushed for military action against Ceres outposts. Moderate voices suggested diplomatic approaches, leveraging the treaty framework that nominally governed human-Felid relations. Others proposed accelerating research into alternative energy sources. Throughout these debates, Kale felt the precariousness of his position. His bond with Lyra provided protection, but also painted a target on both their backs. Soren never missed an opportunity to imply that Kale's recommendations might be deliberately misleading, serving human interests rather than Felid ones. "We must assume the human remains loyal to its own kind," he declared during one heated session. "Any strategy based on its advice inherently compromises our security." "The bond ensures his loyalty," countered a moderate council member. Soren's laugh was derisive. "A trial bond, not yet solidified, and with an outcast, no less. Hardly the strongest foundation for trust." After particularly difficult council sessions, Kale and Lyra would retreat to their quarters in weary silence. But gradually, these evenings became opportunities for deeper conversation as the tensions of the day dissolved into more personal exchanges. "What Soren said about your loyalty," Lyra began one night, hesitantly. "Does it trouble you?" Kale considered the question. "It's complicated. I don't support what Ceres is doing. It's ecologically destructive and short-sighted. But I also don't want violence against humans, even corporate ones." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Lyra had come to recognize as indicating internal conflict. "My loyalty is to understanding, to balance, as you would put it, not to arbitrary sides." "And the bond?" Lyra asked quietly. "Does it feel like a constraint? A violation of your autonomy?" "At first, it was just survival," Kale admitted. "But now," he struggled to articulate the subtle shift in his perception. "During the trial, I experienced fragments of your memories, your perspective. It changed something in how I see this situation, how I see you." Lyra's ears perked with interest. "What did you see?" "Your isolation because of your differences. Your determination to prove yourself through competence rather than aggression. Your growing questions about certain Felid traditions even as you serve them." He met her gaze directly. "Your loneliness." Lyra looked away, her tail twitching with discomfort. "The bond creates echoes, impressions. Not always accurate, but not entirely inaccurate either," Kale pressed gently. "The isolation I felt, it was real, wasn't it? The sense of never quite belonging." After a long pause, Lyra nodded. "The markings of my bloodline appear rarely, perhaps once in several generations. They are considered either blessed or cursed, depending on the perspective and the historical moment. Her voice took on a distant quality. My mother believed they marked me for a significant purpose. My father feared they would make me a target. Both were right in their way. And Soren? Why does he particularly focus on you as an outcast? Lyra's expression hardened. We trained together as younglings. I consistently outperformed him in technical skills, though he was superior in direct combat. He never forgave the humiliation of being bested by a marked one in front of our instructors. Her lips curved in a small, bitter smile. And perhaps he sensed, even then, that I questioned the wisdom of our more aggressive traditions. These quiet exchanges gradually dissolved the remaining barriers between them. Cale began to recognize the subtle emotional cues in Lyra's posture and expressions that most humans would miss. The specific ear positions that indicated contentment versus concern, the tail movements that signaled curiosity or caution. Lyra, in turn, adapted her communication style to bridge the gap, incorporating more human gestures and expressions when they were alone. She began asking questions about Earth, about human societies and customs, about Cale's life before his expedition to Xylos. Their evenings stretched longer, conversations flowing more freely as mutual understanding deepened. One night, reviewing data on particularly concerning fungal degradation patterns, Cale absently reached for a stylus at the same moment Lyra did. Their hands touched briefly, her fur soft against his skin, her body heat several degrees warmer than human norm. In previous weeks, such accidental contact would have resulted in immediate withdrawal. This time, there was a moment's pause before either moved away. Later, as they prepared for rest, Lyra hesitated at the threshold to her sleeping chamber. "The trial period of our bond reaches its midpoint tomorrow," she said. "There will be a brief ritual acknowledgement. It may draw attention." Soren's attention, you mean? Yes, and others who share his views. She seemed about to say more, then simply added, "Be vigilant," before retiring to her chamber. The ritual was indeed brief. A simple presentation before Koresh, a formal acknowledgement of the bond's continuation, a ceremonial sharing of nourishment. But as they left the commander's chambers, Cale noticed an increase in security personnel throughout the corridors. Lyra moved with heightened alertness, one hand never far from the energy blade at her belt. "Something's happening," Cale observed quietly as they made their way back to the research laboratory. "There's been increased series activity at the northern extraction sites," Lyra confirmed, keeping her voice low. "An unusual movement among some of Soren's supporters. Koresh has ordered heightened security protocols." Their concerns proved well-founded. That afternoon, as they were analyzing a particularly damaged fungal sample, the laboratory's communication system activated with a harsh, blaring tone. "Perimeter alert," announced an automated voice. "Unknown energy signatures detected at Outpost 7. All security personnel to defensive positions." Lyra was immediately in motion, checking her weapons. "I need to report to my assigned station. You'll have to return to our quarters and remain there until..." She was interrupted by a secondary alarm, this one pulsing with a different rhythm. Her expression darkened. "Internal alert. Possible systems breach." She activated her personal communicator. "Lyra, to command. Situation report." The response came through with bursts of static. "Multiple incidents. Outpost 7 under attack from unknown forces. Internal systems showing pressure anomalies in lower levels. Possible sabotage." Koresh's voice, tense but controlled. "All personnel to emergency stations. Secure critical areas and vulnerable assets." Lyra looked at Cale, decision crystallizing in her eyes. "Our quarters aren't secure enough if this is coordinated. You're coming with me to my defensive position." They moved swiftly through corridors now filled with purposeful activity. Fielded warriors heading to assigned posts, technicians rushing to address systems issues. The atmosphere was tense, but disciplined. Lyra's defensive position was at a junction overseeing access to the research sector. A fortified alcove with clear sight lines down 3 converging corridors. 2 other fielded warriors were already in position, acknowledging Lyra with curt nods while eyeing Kale with suspicion. "The human stays with me by commander's order," Lyra stated before they could object. "His knowledge may be relevant if the research sector is targeted." For several tense minutes, they monitored the situation through Lyra's communicator. Reports flowed in of a substantial attack on the northern outpost by what appeared to be mercenary forces using series equipment but not bearing corporate insignia. Simultaneously, internal systems throughout the stronghold were experiencing unexplained pressure fluctuations, communications interference, and power surges. "Coordinated," Lyra muttered. "External attack as distraction for internal sabotage. Or internal sabotage to weaken response to the real threat outside," one of the other warriors suggested. Before they could debate further, the lighting in their sector flickered, dimmed, then switched to emergency mode, a dull red glow that cast everything in sinister shadows. Moments later, Lyra's communicator emitted a burst of static, then went silent. "Communications down," she confirmed grimly, drawing her energy blade. "Standard protocol is to maintain position unless directly threatened or ordered otherwise." The minutes stretched on in tense silence. Then, from one of the adjoining corridors, came the sound of approaching footsteps, multiple sets, moving quickly but with stealth. Lyra signaled to her companions, who took up flanking positions. 6 figures emerged from the shadows, fielded warriors in standard stronghold armor, but with distinctive red markings on their shoulder guards that Kale recognized as Soren's faction insignia. They showed no surprise at encountering the defensive position. Their leader stepped forward, not Soren himself, but one of his closest allies. "Security breach in the geothermal control hub," he announced. "Commander Koresh orders all available personnel to report there immediately." Lyra's posture remained alert, suspicious. "Verification code." The leader hesitated fractionally. "Communications are unstable." The order came through emergency channels, which would still require verification, Lyra countered, especially for abandoning a defensive position. A tense silence followed. Then, with frightening suddenness, the leader lunged forward, energy weapon activating with a crackling hum. "Take the human," he shouted. "Kill the outcast." Combat erupted in the confined space. Lyra moved with a fluid grace that belied her lethality, her energy blade deflecting the leader's attack, while her secondary weapon, a small, pistol-like device, fired at another attacker. The 2 warriors with her responded with professional precision, creating a defensive perimeter. But they were outnumbered, and Soren's followers fought with fanatical intensity. One of Lyra's companions went down with a cry of pain. The other took a glancing blow that slowed his reactions. Kale, pressed against the alcove wall, realized the attack's purpose, not just to eliminate Lyra, but to capture him. The leader was trying to maneuver around Lyra's defense, clearly aiming to reach Kale directly. A desperate plan formed in Kale's mind. The corridor junction included access to maintenance conduits, small passages used for servicing the stronghold's infrastructure. During his research, he had studied detailed schematics of these systems, understanding how they connected to the geothermal vents and crystalline power grid. While Lyra fought with increasing desperation, Kale edged toward one such maintenance panel. Using strength born of adrenaline, he wrenched it open, revealing a narrow passage barely large enough for a human to crawl through. "Lyra," he called, "the conduit. I can disrupt the sabotage from inside the system." She glanced back, understanding immediately. "Go," she ordered, renewing her attack with ferocious intensity to cover his movement. Kale scrambled into the conduit, pulling the panel closed behind him just as one of the attackers lunged for him. Inside was cramped darkness, lit only by the soft glow of crystalline power lines running along the tunnel's length. He began crawling rapidly, guided by his mental map of the stronghold's layout. The conduit system was a maze of branching passages following the stronghold's nervous system of power and communication lines. Kale navigated by memory and intuition, heading for what he believed was the source of the system disruptions, the central geothermal control hub where the mountain's natural energy was regulated and distributed. As he neared the hub, he began to hear voices echoing through the metal conduits. Angry, urgent voices speaking in rapid feel-it language. One he recognized immediately, Soren. Overriding the safety protocols now, Soren was saying. When the pressure reaches critical levels, the entire eastern sector will be flooded with superheated steam. The outcast and her human pet will be eliminated, along with anyone who supported them. And the council will believe it was simply part of the attack, replied another voice. A tragic system failure during enemy action. Exactly. With no bond human to complicate matters, we can implement a proper military response to the human encroachment. Koresh will have no choice but to accept my leadership in the crisis. Kale's blood ran cold. Soren was using the external attack as cover for a coup, planning to eliminate opposition within the stronghold while positioning himself as the strong leader needed in a time of crisis. And Lyra, still fighting at the defensive position, was directly in the path of the planned system failure. The maintenance conduit widened as it approached the hub, allowing Kale to reach a ventilation grate that overlooked the control center. Below, he could see Soren and 3 technicians working at crystalline control panels, manipulating energy flows in ways that bypassed normal safety measures. Kale assessed his options. Direct confrontation was suicidal. Even if he managed to drop into the room, he was no match for Soren in combat. Warning Lyra was impossible with communications down. His only hope was to somehow disrupt the sabotage using his knowledge of the systems. From his research on the fungal crystal technology, Kale understood the basic principles of the geothermal regulation. The control Soren was manipulating directed energy through specific crystalline arrays, which could be overloaded if the resonance patterns were disrupted. The ventilation grate was positioned near an auxiliary control panel designed for emergency shutdown. If he could reach it undetected, he might be able to trigger a localized power interruption, not enough to shut down critical systems, but potentially enough to disrupt Soren's sabotage. Taking a deep breath, Kale carefully removed the grate and slipped down into the shadows behind a bank of equipment. The technicians were focused on their task, and Soren was monitoring progress from central position, his back partially turned toward Kale's hiding place. Kale moved silently, using skills honed during delicate field work collecting rare specimens. He reached the auxiliary panel and began the sequence he'd memorized from the technical documents, a specific pattern of crystal activations that would trigger an emergency power redistribution. He was nearly finished when a small sound, perhaps the scuff of his boot on the floor, caused Soren to turn sharply. "Intruder!" the Felid warrior roared, immediately launching himself toward Kale's position. Kale desperately slapped the final crystal in the sequence before diving away from Soren's attack. The panel activated with a high-pitched whine, energy patterns throughout the room fluctuating wildly. Soren recovered quickly, cornering Kale against a bank of crystals. "The bondhuman," he snarled. "How fitting that you'll witness the consequences of your interference before you die." "It's over, Soren," Kale replied, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "The sabotage sequence is interrupted. Koresh will know what you tried to do. A minor setback. The pressure is still building, just more slowly." Soren's lips pulled back in a predatory smile as he activated his energy blade. "And there will be no witnesses to my adjusted plan." He lunged forward, the blade humming with lethal energy. Kale dodged desperately, feeling the heat of the weapon as it missed him by inches. But Soren was a trained warrior, his movements a blur of controlled aggression. The next attack would not miss. Suddenly, the door to the control hub burst open. Lyra stood in the entrance, her uniform torn and bloodied, but her stance unwavering. Behind her were several Felid warriors bearing Koresh's insignia. "Stand down, Soren," she commanded, her energy blade activating with a crackling hum. "By order of Commander Koresh, you are relieved of duty and charged with treason." Soren's expression contorted with rage. The outcast survives. How? Inconvenient. He glanced at the control panels, where warning indicators were flashing urgently. But perhaps not for long. The system is still destabilizing, faster than you can correct it now. That's where you're wrong, Kale said, a sudden realization forming. The fungal crystal matrix responds to harmonic resonance. Your sabotage created destructive interference patterns, but those can be countered with inverse harmonics. He moved to the main control panel, hands flying over the crystals as he implemented the theoretical model he developed during his research. The system responded, crystalline formations pulsing with changing light patterns as energy flows realigned. Soren, seeing his plan unraveling, made a desperate lunge, not at Kale or Lyra, but at the control panel itself, attempting to physically destroy it. Lyra intercepted him with fierce precision, their energy blades clashing in a blinding display of light and power. The fight was brief but intense. Despite his greater size and strength, Soren was thrown off balance by Lyra's unexpected tactics, a fighting style that incorporated techniques Kale recognized from their conversations about her unique training. With a final, decisive move, she disarmed him, her blade stopping just short of his throat. For the attempted murder of a bonded pair, the penalty is severe, she said, her voice steady despite her injuries. But that will be for the council to decide. As Soren was secured by Koresh's warriors, Kale completed the stabilization sequence. The warning indicators gradually subsided, the system returning to normal operation. "How did you find me?" Kale asked Lyra as the immediate crisis passed. "The bond," she replied simply. During the trial of echoes, a connection was formed. Not just ceremonial, something real. I could sense your direction, your presence. She looked almost embarrassed by the admission. It's unusual, even for traditional Fila bonds. Before they could discuss this further, Commander Koresh herself arrived, surveying the scene with calculating eyes. "Report," she ordered. Lyra explained concisely. The coordinated attack, Soren's betrayal, Kale's intervention that prevented catastrophic system failure. Koresh listened without interruption, her expression giving nothing away. When Lyra finished, Koresh turned to Kale. "You risked your life to protect this stronghold. Against one of our own, not humans." It wasn't a question, but she seemed to be seeking confirmation. "I protected what was right," Kale replied simply. "The balance, as Lyra would say." Koresh studied him for a long moment, then inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, if not quite respect. "The external attack has been repelled. Mercenaries, as we suspected, though we have yet to confirm who hired them. Soren's co-conspirators are being identified and contained." She turned back to Lyra. "Your bond human has proven his value beyond question. The council will want a full accounting of today's events." Her whiskers twitched in what might have been the Felid equivalent of a grim smile. "I suspect the trial period of your bond will face no further significant challenges." In the days that followed, the stronghold gradually returned to normal operations. Soren and his closest allies were imprisoned pending formal judgment by the council. The damage to systems was repaired, security protocols were enhanced, and the external boundaries were reinforced against further intrusion. Kale and Lyra found themselves in an unexpectedly elevated position. Their actions during the crisis had transformed perception of their bond from an aberration to be tolerated into a potential asset. Koresh assigned them joint responsibility for developing countermeasures to the ongoing series activities in the fungal forests, a role that acknowledged both Kale's scientific expertise and Lyra's strategic understanding. Their quarters were upgraded to a more spacious set of chambers, with a proper research alcove and direct access to a small crystal garden where some of the less sensitive fungal specimens could be cultivated under controlled conditions. The new space included a shared central area where the boundary between his and hers became increasingly blurred. Evening conversations evolved from professional discussions to more personal sharing. Kale described his home on Earth, a research community nestled in a redwood forest where scientists studied sustainable integration of human needs with natural systems. Lyra spoke of her childhood in a smaller Felid outpost, where traditional ways still held sway and her unusual markings have been viewed with more curiosity than suspicion. The trial of echoes, Kale said one evening as they sat before the soft glow of a crystal hearth. You said the bond it created is unusual. What did you mean? Lyra considered her words carefully. Most bonds form a social and spiritual connection, a recognition, a mutual protection pact with emotional resonance, but rarely a direct sense of the other's presence or state. She looked into the crystalline flames. The most ancient texts speak of deeper connections, bonds where thoughts and emotions could be directly shared across distance. They were considered legendary, possibly metaphorical rather than literal. But that's what you felt during the attack. My location, my emotional state. Yes, and you. Her violet eyes met his, curious but also hesitant, as if fearing his answer. Not as clearly as you, Kale admitted. But yes, a sense of your struggle, your determination. It helped me find the courage to act despite the danger. He paused. Is it because I'm human? Does the difference in our neurophysiology affect how the bond manifests? Perhaps. Or because of my bloodline. Or simply because our minds are particularly compatible despite our differences. Lyra's tale moved in a graceful arc that Kale had come to recognize as indicating thoughtful consideration. The elders would have theories, no doubt. Does it concern you? This unexpected depth to the bond. Lyra was silent for a long moment. It should, by all traditional wisdom. Bonds of such intensity were considered both blessing and burden. Profound connection, but also vulnerability. Her posture softened slightly. Yet I find I do not regret it. The official end of their trial bond period arrived with ceremonial formality. They stood before the full council, including Koresh and representatives from multiple strongholds who had traveled to witness the unprecedented permanent bonding of a Felid and human. The ritual itself was simple but weighted with significance. They each spoke traditional words of commitment, adapted slightly to acknowledge their different origins, but emphasizing the shared values they had discovered: balance, understanding, mutual protection, and support. When the formal affirmations were complete, Kale presented Lyra with the token he had crafted during stolen moments in the research laboratory. A small pendant combining a piece of crystalline matrix with a fragment of earth metal from his original equipment, shaped into a symbol that represented neither human nor Felid design, but something new, emergent from their shared experiences. Lyra accepted it with visible emotion, then presented her own gift, a small energy blade designed for human proportions, its hilt inlaid with a distinctive silver-gray fur pattern that matched her own unique markings. Not just for protection, she explained softly, but as a symbol of trust. My bloodline's essence, freely given. The council members observed with reactions ranging from approval to lingering skepticism, but none voiced opposition. The events of Soren's betrayal and the joint defense of the stronghold had silenced the most vehement critics. After the ceremony, they walked together along one of the crystalline balconies overlooking the vast fungal forest that spread beneath the mountain range. The twin moons of Xylos hung in the sky, casting a silvery light that made the landscape glow with subtle bioluminescence. What happens now? Kale asked, still adjusting to the reality of their formalized permanent bond. Many things remain unresolved, Lyra acknowledged. Ceres still threatens the fungal ecosystems. Relations between our peoples are still fraught with tension and mistrust. Your original expedition team likely believes you dead or imprisoned. And us? This bond that shouldn't have been possible. Lyra turned to face him, her violet eyes reflecting the moonlight. Perhaps that is precisely why it formed. The impossible connection between different worlds. Her hand reached for his, the soft fur against his skin, now a familiar, welcome sensation. We are pioneers, exploring territory neither human nor Felid has mapped before. Kale smiled, feeling the resonance of their bond humming between them like a crystalline harmonic. Exploration is what scientists do best, and adaptation is what survivors excel at, Lyra added, her lips curving in the expression she had cultivated specifically for their interactions. They turned back to the vista before them, the vast, luminous landscape stretching to the horizon, beautiful and dangerous, and filled with mysteries yet to be understood. Whatever challenges awaited, they would face them not as human and Felid, not as researcher and warrior, but as something new, a bonded pair whose connection transcended the boundaries of separate evolution. In the soft glow of the twin moons, with the gentle pulse of fungi, fields beneath them, and the warm hum of crystal energy around them, they stood together, hand in hand, equal partners, their improbable bond now the strongest foundation in an uncertain future.